Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
He's only been in office 9 months, but he's already been on the national stage. A conversation with Idaho's newest congressman, Raul Labrador, about life and politics inside the Beltway. That's Dialogue next. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. He went from the halls of the Idaho State House to the halls of Congress during one of our nation's most urgent fiscal times. Praised by House Speaker John Boehner for his conservative fiscal values, political pundits have dubbed Raul Labrador, Idaho's newest congressman, as a Tea Party darling. The 1st District congressman has appeared on national television programs like Meet the Press and This Week with Christiana Amanpour to discuss his views on budget and tax issues. An immigration attorney, colleagues have also looked to Representative Labrador for advice on immigration concerns. Mr. Labrador is back in his home district this week. He's here to update us on Capitol Hill issues and take your questions. And we're really glad you could stop by because it looked earlier this week like you might still need to be in D.C. as the House and Senate continued their budget standoff. So thank you for being here.
It's my honor to be here. Thank you, Marcia.
And do you have a question for Representative Labrador? Please give us a call, toll free, at 1-800-973-9800. Well, first, before we get into the politics, is this job what you expected? I'm sure you can't really predict what it's going to be like, but what's different than you thought it might be?
You know, I don't think anything's different. It's just such an honor to represent the people of Idaho in Congress. As we were talking before the show, it's such an amazing place to be in Washington, D.C. And when you take the politics out of it, just what a beautiful building. Every time I walk towards the Capitol, I just kind of pinch myself thinking about how I can't even understand or believe that I'm there representing the people of Idaho. So, and it's still that way every single morning when I walk towards the Capitol, and I think I will feel that every single day that I'm there.
Well, you spend a lot of time there because you actually stay there overnight, right? I mean, that's where you sleep.
Yes.
And why is that?
It's expensive to live in Washington, D.C.
Right. So there are other members of Congress that do that as well.
There's about 50, correct.
Wow, that's quite a bit. So there's places for you to shower and freshen up and everything.
Yeah, there's a gym.
There's a gym.
Yes.
Well, so what's it like at night there? Is it quiet?
Very quiet, yes. Yeah, very lonely.
Well, I wonder if there's ghosts or something there. But as far as getting things done, how has that been? Has that been different than you expected? Slower? Or,
you know, it is a little bit
fractious?
slower. I don't know about fractious. I think Congress is always fractious, and I think people expect Congress to do things in a certain way, and it's never going to be that way. I mean, we have a divided government for a reason. Our founding fathers, I think in their wisdom, gave us 2 houses of Congress so we wouldn't rush through things. So I think it's sometimes good that things are slow, but sometimes it is too slow. And what I get most frustrated about is when I'm talking to somebody about something we should do, like tax reform, for example. I believe very strongly we need to do tax reform. And you'll get a senior member of Congress who says, oh yeah, we've been talking about that for 20 and 30 years. I'm like, you know, you should stop talking about it for 20 or 30 years. You should just get it done. The American people are asking us to do this. Let's just get it done.
Well, just last week, though, there's just been an incredible logjam with the continuing resolution for the budget. And part of that was because House Republicans, and in particular people who align themselves with the Tea Party, wanted to see offsets, wanted to see if we're going to give more money to FEMA for disaster relief, we need to take it from someplace. And the Senate was not too happy with that. Why did you and others feel that was so important to make a point on that?
Well, it's imperative that we start doing things differently in Washington, D.C. If you think about it, we're only going to save this next fiscal year $7 billion. We have a $3.5 trillion budget, $3.5 trillion, and the only thing we're going to save from that budget is $7 billion. What the Senate wanted to do was add another $7 billion in disaster relief money to the budget for 2012. And so then we wouldn't have saved any amount of money. I think everyone in America, everyone in Idaho has made a decision in their home that they have to spend less money, that they have to make important decisions, rational decisions. And it's about time that government started doing that.
We have a question. I asked for questions from our viewers through email and through our Facebook page. And Craig from McCall wrote in, and he said, do you believe that federal disaster aid to fight forest fires in Idaho should come with no strings attached, or do you believe that corresponding cuts should be made in other federal aid to Idaho before this disaster aid is dispersed?
You know, I believe
again,
that we need to spend less money. $3.5 trillion. Let's talk about that, what that means. Every single day, we're spending $9 billion. Of that $9 billion, we're borrowing about $4 billion. That means that 42 cents of every dollar that we spend in Washington, D.C. is borrowed. I think everybody who's watching this show has gone through the same cycle that we're going through in the federal government. They've had to sit at the table, at the kitchen table, and decide what things they're going to cut, what things they're not going to cut. What were we going to use for offsets in Washington, D.C.? We were going to use the money that's being spent on Solyndra and projects like that now we're learning are actually not really great projects and that we're wasting money. In fact, just today, the federal government decided to give $1 billion in additional spending to these companies that are doing solar panels and other things. So I believe that we can act responsibly while at the same time we're taking care of the people in the United States.
But meantime, people were looking at that and saying, you know, there's people who need the money for flood relief.
They were going to get their money.
It's being hung up because.
But what happened? It wasn't being hung up. It was actually a political ploy by the Democrats, because what happened, why did we finally get an agreement? Because all of a sudden the administration decided that they actually had enough money to take care of the FEMA disaster relief.
So let me ask you, as I mentioned in the introduction, you've been called a Tea Party darling. You've also said that, you know, you don't. Well, explain that. I mean, do you consider yourself
what
part
I
of the Tea
mean
Party?
is that congressmen need to be careful. And if you look at the record of the people who call themselves Tea Party freshmen, it's actually not that great. About half of them have actually voted with leadership on every single issue that leadership wants. And what I think the Tea Party movement is an organic movement. It's something where the people of Idaho and the people of the United States feel really strongly about how much money we're spending. I think when you're trying to take the mantle of a Tea Party freshman, sometimes you're not really a believer in what the Tea Party movement is about.
And are you?
Absolutely.
Okay, we see you addressing the Tea Party here, and I believe, I want to say maybe January 2009?
Correct.
Or 10? How big of a role do you think that the Tea Party is playing now in Congress? Because at first when it was started up, people said, you know, whatever, it won't have much of a role, the political pundits. And now people are saying, hey, you know, they're...
Well, I think the movement itself, I don't know how big of a role the movement by itself is playing, but I think the fact that the American people are fed up with these numbers, that we're spending so much money, that we're borrowing so much money, I think Americans all throughout the United States are tired of Washington spending too much, borrowing too much, and taxing too much.
We have a question that came in from Rick on our Facebook page, or it's actually through Twitter. He said, why are you so rigid and dogmatic? Isn't the role of a legislator to compromise to form solutions?
Well, Rick should actually follow what I'm doing instead of making his own opinions. I'm actually not that rigid or dogmatic. Remember what I said at the City Club just this week. I talked about ways that I could actually work with the president, and I mentioned 3 things that we could actually work on. The president has said that he's for less spending. I'm for less spending. The president has said that he's for less regulation. I'm for less regulation. And the president has said that he's actually for reforming the tax code. I'm very strongly in favor of reforming the tax code. These are 3 things that would not cost the American people anything. In fact, it would cost us less because of less regulation, less spending, and a different tax code. And it would actually bring about what we all want, which is job growth and a better economy.
Some people have pointed to the fact that, you know, over the fight over the debt ceiling and the FEMA issue, and they look at that and they say that's being too rigid and uncompromising and holding up
the compromising in Washington, D.C. has gotten us to $14.5 trillion in debt. If that's what you want, if you want a congressman that will go back to Washington, D.C. and do the same thing that every other congressman has done over the last 20 years, which is spend more money and borrow more money, I'm not the person for you. If you want somebody who's going to go back there and actually make sure that we change the way Washington does things, and I think every American wants that, then I'm the person for you.
You mentioned the City Club of Boise. We had a question come in from Dave, who said, as reported on the Spokesman Review blog, you stated that the City Club of Boise, when people scream about Republicans unwilling to raise taxes on the rich, they're partly right. We can't just cut our way out of this mess. No nation has ever cut its way to prosperity. And then Dave says, I submit that in the years of the Bush tax cuts, we haven't cut our way to prosperity either. Could you
Absolutely.
comment?
I mean, that's the one thing that people need to understand about me. I'm not going to sit here and criticize just the Obama administration and just Democrats. Republicans and Democrats over the last 20 years have gotten us over a $14.5 trillion debt. That has happened under both administrations. And I think that's what the Tea Party movement is about, going back to your original question. The Tea Party movement was fed up with what the Bush administration was doing, and they finally started speaking out when Obama was elected. And I think the American people are tired of both parties being dishonest with the American people. They want us to tell them the truth. They want us to tell them that Medicare is in trouble, that Social Security is in trouble, and they want us to find real solutions.
But they
to
also
those problems.
don't want to have their pet programs cut. So
Absolutely,
and the polls show that. The polls show that.
That's the most
So-
frustrating thing. People will come into my office and they will say, "Cut every other program, but don't cut mine."
But mine.
Yeah.
At the same time, you said at the City Club of Boise that, quote, it's fundamentally unfair that companies like GE are making huge profits and are paying no taxes.
Absolutely.
So what would you do? Because if that's the case, if you want to remove some exemptions from these companies, that's essentially raising taxes, isn't it, on them?
It will be. They will actually pay more taxes, and that's what people don't understand about what Republicans are saying. I think most people think that what we're talking about, or at least Republicans like myself, that we're talking about just reducing taxes and nothing else. What we need to do is get rid of all the exemptions that are out there. There's a number of exemptions that are fundamentally unfair because, like all the exemptions that GE got because of of their energy business. They actually paid zero taxes last year, even though they had amazing profits. And there's many companies like that. We need to start looking at those. We need to have a flatter tax, a fairer tax. We get rid of those exemptions, and what you can actually do is reduce the overall tax rates for all Americans.
People are worried, for instance, about the charitable tax exemption going away or the house tax exemption
Those are
going
the
away.
only two that I would keep. And I think I said that at the City Club of Boise. Because those are actually two exemptions that where everyone is treated the same. The problem with government, and Solyndra is the perfect example. The problem with government is that we start picking winners and losers instead of letting the market pick the winners and losers. And we can't do that anymore. We need to get out of the business of trying to decide what the government should be spending their money on.
You have signed Grover Norquist's pledge,
Yes.
have you not, to never raise taxes? So how does that...
No, the pledge doesn't say never raise taxes. The pledge actually says
offset.
exactly to offset, to make sure that you have a tax plan that is revenue neutral.
So if you change these exemptions, say for companies like you were just talking about, offset it
With a tax reduction
Some-
for everyone. So, which then makes the system fair. Then you don't have to have an expensive lawyer or an expensive lobbyist to get any kind of tax breaks. Everyone gets the same tax break. If you're a small company in Idaho or if you're GE, you get the same tax rate. And that's, I think, what most Americans want.
So we did have a question come in about Grover Norquist's pledge. Brian says, do you see, by signing this pledge, do you see yourself contradicting your oath of office in which you swore to protect and defend the Constitution? Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution specifies that Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. Why would you sign a pledge, he says, written by a private lobbyist to give up your constitutional authority to raise and collect taxes?
That's a ridiculous question. It's if you read the pledge, maybe he needs to go read the pledge. What the pledge says is that I will not raise overall tax rates. And it's something that I looked at, and it's something that I believe in. Whether I had signed the pledge or not, I was not going to raise people's tax rates. But I am willing to get rid of the exemptions. So I think people need to sort of back up a little bit and actually read what the pledge says, because most people think that what the pledge says is what you said initially, which is that you're not going to raise taxes at all. Some people under a tax reform bill will pay more taxes today than tomorrow than they're paying today.
Do you believe the wealthiest people in America need to be taxed more?
No, actually, the AP completely went against what the Obama administration is saying. The AP actually did a report, and in their report they said
Associated Press.
Thank you, the Associated Press, and they found that millionaires and billionaires are actually paying a larger, more effective tax rate.
So Warren Buffett aside,
he doesn't know. What he's doing is comparing apples to oranges. It's kind of like going to the store and saying, well, my lemons are more expensive than my oranges. Well, of course they are, because they're two different fruits. Well, with the tax rates that Warren Buffett is talking about, he's talking about two different tax rates.
Let's take some phone calls. They are screened now. Jack in Meridian, go ahead. Jack? Jack?
Yes.
Go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, Congressman, I'd like him to tell us, if he can, how much support he thinks he has in his effort to bring about some common sense and balanced budget.
Sounds like you are a supporter.
I am a definite supporter.
Okay, thanks so much for calling in, Jack. What's your sense from talking to your constituents?
Thank you, Jack. I think in Idaho we have very strong support. Everywhere I go in Idaho, the people in Idaho are quite excited about what we're doing. They support me, even Democrats and independents. When I start talking about tax reform, this is something that the American people want overwhelmingly. About 80% of the American people are behind me on actually getting rid of these loopholes. So I think the American people are behind me. What frustrates me is that back in Washington, people are unwilling to actually make the tough choices.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because we keep mentioning the City Club, but you did speak there earlier this week, and you talked about a change of heart that you've kind of had after being in Congress for just even 9 months. And we'll talk about that in a moment, but let's take a look at a clip from a debate that you were in here with Idaho Reports on our Idaho debates.
I do not support term limits. I've always been on the record that I do not support term limits for Congress at this time. As long as you have the people in Congress, you have all the staff, all the lobbyists, all the people that have the influence in Washington, D.C., I don't think it's wise for a congressman to actually pledge to term limit himself or herself when the people that actually are pulling all the strings over there are still going to be there and are still going to have all the power.
So that's what you said in the debate. And now at City Club of Boise, you mentioned you've had a change of heart and you would support term limits.
I would. I'm still not going to pledge term limits for myself, because I think that would be unwise, because that makes you less effective. But one of the things that, like I was saying earlier, one of the things that's been most frustrating is to talk to Congress people back there who have been there for a long time, and every one of their decisions, or most of their decisions, are based on what's going to get them reelected. And I think it's time for the American people to have a stronger say on this. And I think it's sad, because we are going to have to make tough decisions in Washington, D.C. And many of the decisions I will make, I know the people in Idaho are not going to like, because we're going to have to reform the tax code. We're going to have to reform Medicare. We're going to have to reform Medicaid. And that's just being honest. That's just being honest with the American people. Right now, we have 3 people for every 1 retiree. When the Social Security system was first put in place on the Medicare system, there were 17 people for every 1 retiree. It's impossible for us to continue to spend without making any major changes to these programs.
But you say if you term limit yourself, you don't think you'd be effective?
I don't think you'll be, if you term limit yourself, you won't be as effective, because then you're the only one who has term limits.
Oh, I see what you're saying. It needs to apply to everyone.
But
what about this issue of the staff still stays there, and they're often the ones that set policy?
And that was one of the reasons I was against it. But I still think that when we have stronger people going back there who will make the strong decisions, like I have, I have some of my staff sometimes says, well, the way we've always done it here in Washington is this way. I said, I don't care the way we've done it in Washington. This is the way the people of Idaho want me to do it.
Okay, let's take a call from Dwight all the way up in Smelterville. Dwight, go ahead, please.
Hello?
Hi, go ahead.
I'd like to ask the congressman about the grizzly bear issue here in North Idaho.
The grizzly bear issue?
Yes.
And what about it?
Well, we're having them shove down our throat. people are getting killed every day. We've had several recent deaths on both sides, hunters, grizzlies, and our U.S. Forest Service and the wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Survey, to be in some kind of unethical relationship with a private Canadian-based outfit called Yukon, the Yellowstone Grizzly Bear Conservation Initiative.
Okay,
Can he do anything about it?
okay. Let's get an answer. Thanks so much for calling in, Dwight, all the way from Smelterville.
Thank you, Dwight. That's a great question. We actually drafted a bill with Senator Crapo, Senator Risch, and myself that is going to take care of this issue. This is the problem we have right now. Is the Endangered Species Act is really affecting a lot of people, and we're making unwise decisions where we're actually more worried about the safety of the bear, for example, than we're about the safety of humans. And as you know, there was a
Yes.
recent case up in North Idaho where a man was arrested when he thought he was actually defending his family. So we've tried to do, and you have to be a little bit careful with this, so we've tried to draft a solution to this where before a person is actually prosecuted of this crime, the Department of Interior and the Secretary of Interior can actually look at the case and decide whether that person's life or somebody else's life was in danger.
As far as grizzly bears on the Endangered Species Act, there's not much at this point that.
At this
that you
point,
can-
this is the first step, but we really need to start looking at this because there's been several attacks up there, and I think we need to understand when it comes to wolves, when it comes to grizzly bears, that they're actually thriving.
The first bill that you have introduced actually has to do, again, some crossover here with the Department of Interior. It has to do with the Antiquities Act.
Correct.
And your sense that the President of the United States should not be able to unilaterally designate memorials such as Craters of the Moon National Memorial or Escalante, which Clinton did. And why is this so important to you, and do you think it's going to be able to go through?
I don't know if it's going to go through, but it's important because so much of the land in Idaho is owned by the federal government, and we keep getting presidents who keep taking away our land. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're not saying that the president doesn't have the authority to designate those areas, but what we want him to do is that if he or she designates them, that he or she has to go through Congress before it's approved. Because as you know, most of these designations happen on the last day of the term. So like Bill Clinton did it, he did it on the last day of his term. And as we said jokingly, the last thing that a president does is he pardons criminals and he designates lands. And I think there's got to be a reason why they do that on the last day, because they know that it's not popular with the American people.
Let's take a call from Walt in Nampa. Walt, go ahead, please.
Yes, I was to understand the Keystone Pipeline project out of Canada has had a hearing in Congress, and I was wondering where we're at on that.
The Keystone Pipeline project, and that would be, you mean, going to
Well, from the Canada Oil
Canada
Sands.
to
From the
Alberta. Right.
from Canada all the way to the Gulf.
Right. Thanks so much for your call.
You know, I'm not on the committee that deals with that issue. I know as much as probably the caller knows from what I've heard in the media, and I think it's a shame. I think the Wall Street Journal today had an editorial where they said that all the jobs that would be created by all this money we're giving to Solyndra and other solar panel companies would be 35 or 45 permanent jobs. If we actually do the Keystone Pipeline, we would create thousands of jobs, and it wouldn't cost the American people anything.
Real briefly, we're already running out of time. I'm going to quickly ask you about some other environmental questions. In your district, they're looking at mini fracking for natural gas. Are you in support of the communities in your district doing that?
Absolutely.
And also, similar to what the gentleman was talking about there's a mega load issue
Yes.
in your district as well. Trucks with loads going towards the tar sands. Is that something that you're in support of?
I support it, and it's really sad because we could have created a number of jobs in Lewiston. And this is the problem, that every time we have one of these fights, what we have is real world implications where we have people that are working that have to leave the area. We have companies that are willing to invest in the area, and they leave the area. And I think that's really sad.
And also in your district, there's a proposed nuclear power plant.
Yes.
Is that something that you are supportive of
I
that
am in favor of nuclear, yes.
in that particular proposal?
I don't know enough about the proposal, but I am definitely in favor of nuclear, and anything that goes through the system and that goes, is vetted correctly, I would be completely in favor of. And I think the county commission has done a good job there and is looking at that.
I would be remiss in not asking you about immigration issues. You will have a bill that you're going to be introducing soon.
Next week.
Next week, which is kind of a partial, it looks at a part of the immigration issue because
the immigration issue is a huge issue, and the whole system is broken. So we're starting with just a small bite of the apple, and what we have is a bill that deals with people that are in science, technology, engineering, and math, the STEM programs, people that are actually here legally studying in those programs. If they get an advanced degree, so it's a master's or above, they would be able to apply just like they apply right now for their green cards, but they can do it in a more expedited fashion. And we, many of these people are graduating from our colleges, are taking all the wealth of knowledge that they have acquired in our colleges, and they're taking it back to their home countries, and then they're creating jobs over there.
Which some people would say is a good thing, that they go home and with
they
that
do.
education.
Some people say that, but the good thing right now, the unemployment in those areas is actually 3%. Even though we have 9% nationally, it's only 3%.
So you'd like to see it easier for them to stay here. At the City Club of Boise back in 2007, and I listened to the audio of this last night, you said you thought that the particular regulation within the Immigration Nationality Act that makes an undocumented immigrant go home for 10 years before they can reapply for citizenship here was ridiculous. I believe it's 212A9C.
Correct.
Do you still feel that way? Do you feel that should be relaxed a bit so that, say, children who were brought here when they were little and then find out they're undocumented don't have to go back for
correct.
10 years?
For 10 years, I think that's too long. I think you should be encouraged and actually mandated to go back to your home country so you can apply for the process. But once you apply, I think you should be given an opportunity to come back to the United States legally. And right now what's happening is that people apply, they go back to their home countries, and they have to stay there for 10 years. And what ends up happening is that most of them don't leave the country because they have no incentive to actually do it the legal way.
And the DREAM Act, I know back in 2007 you said that you were supportive of the concept of the DREAM
Correct.
Act of helping young people who are doing well in college who are undocumented have a path to citizenship. Do you still feel that way?
There's two things about the DREAM Act that I can't support. Number one is in-state tuition. I think it's fundamentally unfair. Number two, the DREAM Act actually had a pathway to citizenship. But we do need to think about what we do, and I don't know that I have an answer for this, but we need to think about what we do with these kids that have come here when they're 2 years old, and they didn't even know in some cases that they were not U.S. citizens.
And finally, as we wrap up, looking at the presidential landscape, no endorsements yet?
No endorsements. I have no idea what.
I know you give a shout out to Rick Perry on one of the Sunday morning shows.
I did, but I like Rick Perry. I like Mitt Romney. I actually like Ron Paul, and I like Michelle Bachmann, and I like Herman Cain, who's actually doing a pretty good job right now. So there's almost too many choices.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming and speaking with me and our viewers. Really appreciate it. You've been listening to Representative Raul Labrador on Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. Thanks for joining us.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.